Hey everybody, this is Zeke. Regarding this darn flu that's going around and harming so many people, a teacher at our local elementary school, a Mrs. Jenkins, at the Larksport, Arkansas elementary school, asked me to read a letter from her class to Dr. Anthony Fauci in Washington, D.C. You see, President Trump trusts Dr. Fauci to, how should I say it, point all of our resources in the best direction to save as many people as possible from this terrible, terrible virus. Well, as coincidence would have it, it just so happens that Mrs. Jenkins' second grade class spent a day last October asking the kids what they would do if the Black Plague of Europe ever came back here and started killing people all over again, even in modern times. She called it something like a fictitious exercise or something like that. Now, what would these kids do if the plague or any disease started spreading again? That's what this class did in the period after lunch up until the point when they got onto the buses to go home. Now, please understand, these are just kids, and what they come up with ain't going to be written up in the new version of Grey's Anatomy book. But what concerns Mrs. Jenkins right now is that Dr. Fauci and all the other Harvard and MIT PhDs putting out these plans to keep us all safe, well, they ain't even employing the basics of what these elementary school kids came up with last year. I'm concerned too, because what the kids came up with wasn't even that great, and the government's still not doing it, if you see what I mean. Their paper was submitted to the Arkansas Science Fair qualifier last year, along with a $20 application fee, and they weren't even considered as a finalist to move on. Some little Peckerwood boy that proposed a way to get an extra 3 ounces of milk out of a cow's udder placed just ahead of the Larksport school. You know how little 3 ounces is? It ain't shit. Heck, I'll leak that much into the bed after taking a piss in the middle of the night. That being said and whatnot, Mrs. Jenkins gave me their paper, and she asked me to share their ideas with Dr. Fauci in the hopes that it ain't too late for it to do some sort of good up there in D.C. Now again, the exercise was, class, what would y'all do if a deadly disease was spreading all around? And they used the example of like an old plague from Europe. Now the first thing the class came up with was to stop travel to and from the country where the, quote, outbreak was starting up. Stop travel to and from that shitty place. In this case, it was China. You know what's going on now? You see, if people are dying in a certain place, it just made sense to these second graders to stop going there and to stop people from there from flying here. So I'm reading here, I'm looking at the paper right now, that the Larksport Elementary School would have ended all flights to and from China at the precise moment a word or a story of a major sickness was coming out of China and the moment it was confirmed. The second graders would have shut down the flights. Now, cargo ships coming in from the Orient would still come in. According to the class, they'd still be unloaded, but the personnel on board wouldn't be allowed to get off the ship. The second graders didn't know exactly how that would work out, but one kid figured out if the cranes can lift off the pallets of TVs and all the other junk and the rubber dog shit off the ship, that same crane could lift a bunch of Chinese food back onto the ship to keep the workers on board well fed till they got back to the Orient. And Mrs. Jenkins explained to the children that it was likely that it wasn't just Orientals that would be working on a ship like that, and there would be some white people on the ship. So 400 pounds of lo mein ain't going to do the trick. Let me flip the page, get to the second page here. These second graders, according to this, they can't understand why Dr. Fauci and President Trump allowed flights from China right up to the point where the pandemic was declared. For up to 6 weeks after these newspapers were talking about this Wuhan outbreak, the second graders found out that up to 5,000 Chinese a day were flying into the U.S., flying into Canada, flying into all the different parts of Europe. I'm not just talking about the Shenyun Kung Fu dancers. All sorts of Chinese were coming in for weeks and weeks and weeks after they declared pandemic. For weeks and weeks and weeks, these Orientals were coming and going from every major city in the West. Why didn't they shut that down as the first measure? I don't know. Again, I'm going to say this many times in this presentation. Dr. Fausti's smarter than I am, so I'm sure he has good answers for all of this. But I look down at this paper and I just keep coming to the same conclusion, that these second graders are putting in measures and offering up common sense that the government doesn't even seem to be following. There's a note here, page 6, page 7 is not front page news, but even Sergeant Murtaugh, Riggs and Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon, Sergeant Murtaugh and his son-in-law Butters, they're now married. They were smuggling in another load of Chinese indentured servants, and they changed their plans and sent that ship back home, afraid of the virus. So just to summarize this page before I flip to the next page, the summary is the kids would have cut off air travel to and from that place, and eventually, if it got bad enough, air travel in the United States, all commercial air travel. People can still drive to where they need to go. That sounds bad, but it ain't as bad as locking 1 billion people up into their homes. That don't make no sense. Lock 1 billion people up into their homes when you can look up in the sky and the planes are still flying. So they didn't even take the most basic measure first and are still allowing that today. It don't make no sense, but I'm sure Dr. Fausti, being as smart as he is, he'll be able to explain all this to me, because I just have a simple mind. And these are just minds of a child. They don't understand nothing, neither do I. Dr. Fausti's going to explain it to us. So I'm looking forward to my meeting with him. Okay, next page. Students here noticed that the news media reminds us about 400 times every day to social distance. It's even on all the damn commercials right now. They don't say that, but I've been noticing it's all the goddamn commercials, social distance, State Farm, all this bullshit. But when the president stands behind the podium for the daily briefing, or the vice president, or whatever a bastard stands up behind the podium, or Dr. Fausti does, or his ghoul does, responsible for what's called the response team, they always have like a bunch of people hard-pressed right up behind up their asses. People standing all over around that podium, all up against each other, almost smelling each other's breath and what they had for lunch. Now, I know they're the government. They're smarter than we are. They probably already got some sort of special vaccine that they don't give to us. But shouldn't they at least be setting a good example for the rest of us in terms of this social distancing? Shouldn't Trump be at the podium, say, by himself, setting a good example for social distancing? Or at least if he had those other poor bastards behind him, at least have him 6 feet away, just like they tell us. Me and the class can't understand this behavior. Now, I know authority loves to do this. They have to do this. Like even some shooting last year, whatever the event, some dumb motherfucker comes up to a podium and all the other assholes are right behind him. There's a whole army of assholes they have to show behind him. They have to show some sort of unity or something. Where if it was just a guy at a podium, people would be so scared out of their wits, they'd go out of their mind. They need to know all the motherfuckers are working on it together. That makes sense for the shooting last year, or the space shuttle blowing up, or whatever the fuck it is. But this is supposed to be a social distancing situation. So the kids noticed it don't make no sense, but nobody else does. This is what's got me scratching my head. Even our local news is doing a pretty good job setting a good example in this regard. I was watching the weather the other day, trying to get the weather. CBS Philly, what's the name of that weather girl? Not Cecily Tynan, the one that gained the weight after having the kids and just can't quite lose it. Kate Bilo. I kid you not, Kate Bilo's in her kitchen, and the kid is screaming from the other room. Now, I have no problem with this. She's trying to set a good example, trying to be safe. It's okay if the kid screams in the other room for a few weeks. But Trump and Pence can't figure this out? On the same channel, the local sports guy, CBS Philly, a black fella, he does the sports from his living room. Again, I got no problem with it. He's social distancing. But to me, he looks a little bit too comfortable with this situation. A little too comfortable with not having to go into work. Looks like he's a few days away from reenacting that scene from Trading Places where Billy Ray Valentine kicks all those motherfuckers out of his house for messing up his stuff. So to summarize this page, the class just can't figure out why they say to do one thing and they don't do it themselves. In fact, they do just the opposite, when to do that thing is really, really easy. So regarding social distancing, best thing I ever heard anybody come up with, my wife came up with a slogan that helps all of us remember. Stay 6 feet away or your ass will be 6 feet under. You don't think that's why they chose 6 feet, do you? I don't know. It says right here in this book, this other Gray's Anatomy, a sneeze can travel 25 feet at over 100 miles per hour. So what the hell is 6 feet going to do for us anyway? Okay, next page. Okay, one kid in class here, a little kid by the name of Bart Brightwater, wrote this. He said, Zeke, please ask Dr. Fausti why people who feel sick are lining up their cars to get this test, or even if the test says they have it, not a goddamn thing can be done about it. See, I'm a little shocked by his language here, Bart, but he goes on to say, if 30 million people a year get what they call the regular flu, why do these poor sons of bitches care what strain they have? Well, Bart, I'm going to have to speak to your mama about your language, but it overall is a very good question for Dr. Fausti. If there was actually something that could be done for what a person had, I guess it would be a good idea to know what you have, even if it's just to find a local herbal remedy. Like if it's CV, somebody might say, put a garlic press over your neck twice a day for 3 days, and maybe that would help. But in this case, there ain't none of that. There ain't nothing that can be done. So if there ain't no types of remedies, what's the test for? If you get a test and they just tell you in 3 days, it comes back and it says, you got it. Who cares if you know you got it, if nothing can be done with that information? So a little card comes in the mail that says that you're infected with it. It says you have it. And get well soon, you poor devil. That's all that's going to happen. That's all you're going to get out of the test. Is that all you want? A card to come in the mail and say, get well soon, you poor devil? A person may live in the back alley across the street from the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, but there's not a damn thing anybody can do for you. So why do you want to know? Why do they talk on the news all day long about the importance of this test? My barn is infected with rats and mice. Don't do me a hill of beans good to know what kind of rat it is, to know what kind of mouse it is. What I need to do is the same in either case. What somebody needs to do, if they have this, that, or the other thing, is stay in bed and rest. There's nothing can be done. Sure, in the rat and mouse example, if I had to match my poison exactly to the type of rat, then I would need to test them, wouldn't I? But that ain't the case. All these sick people lining up to get the test. The poor bastard shouldn't have left their bed in their home in the first place. What happened to social distancing? We just talked about it. What happened to social distancing? The sick-ass person sitting right next to the driver, driving them to the test. Or did they drive themselves? And if they did that, they ain't that sick to begin with, are they? You know, I guess if you drive to the test in a giant Cadillac Escalade, you could be far enough potentially from the driver where the driver has a chance of escaping with his life. But what if you're in one of those small little Peckerwood Fiat cars that they introduced that flopped 3 or 4 years ago? 2 people all pressed up against each other. The driver will come back sick or dead. In Mrs. Jenkins' second grade class from Arkansas, they came up with this sound advice. If you're sick and your immune system is fighting it off, don't take the chance of introducing other illnesses at the same time. Just stay in bed. That's sound advice, even from little kids. They don't have an MD, and they are not licensed to give medical advice, I must note to anybody listening to this. But the class said, keep your hands out of your eyes, nose, and mouth, and stay the fuck home. I added that. You don't want strep throat and bronchitis at the same time, so stay home. These CV motherfuckers go and find one of these test sites where some guy in a big orange hazmat suit has been putting swabs in other people's mouths for 4-hour shifts. Didn't he put his hands in the mouth of about 1,000 other sick people lining their cars up all morning before he put his hands in your mouth? Well, what you're probably saying to me right now is common sense that they're using different swabs, of course. Well, I know that. No crap, they're using different swabs. But the guy doesn't change his gloves every time a car pulls up, does he? And he's wearing the same sneeze-covered hazmat suit the whole entire day. So you're going to pull up to one of these motherfuckers, put the passenger window down, and let this guy put his gloved hands in or near your mouth. Think about that. Little Rock whorehouses are more sanitary than that. Now, I won't tell Bart, who submitted the question from the second grade class, that. I just have that from personal experience. All of these people that drive up assume the swabbing motherfucker is perfect and won't make any mistakes for the entire day. I'm sure that dummy has used the same swab on more than 2 people many, many times. Is he going to tell anybody about it? You think he's going to open himself up to lawsuit and tell his boss right away and ask his boss to contact the person that he swabbed twice or used the old dirty swab on? We need to contact him. You think he's going to tell his boss that an AIDS patient used the same swab 1 minute before? He ain't going to say shit. He's going to cover his own ass the moment he realizes what he did. And he's going to put both tests in the trash, buried deep down under a pile of hot dog wrappers. And both people that had swab, they ain't going to get one thing in the mail or another. They ain't still going to have to go back for another test. Now, for both people, the test never comes, but they both just had a minor cold and they get better in 3 or 4 days. Except the one guy, the guy that was tested second, he gets a little notice in the mail from the Magic Johnson AIDS Foundation that he's contracted the HIV. And that motherfucker is dumbfounded, because he ain't been with no men. He ain't even been with no women. He ain't using no drugs. So where the hell did this come from? And then one day it hits him. It was that goddamn test. All right, let me flip the page here. New submitted question. This one from Jezebel Stewart from Mrs. Jenkins' class, 2nd grade class in Arkansas. Dr. Fausti, how is it that I've learned my entire life that there ain't no cure for viruses? Nothing at all can be done, and the news in early March, Dr. Fausti, said they're working or are close to 2 possible cures. Now, I told Miss Jezebel that she's got to have that information wrong. She must be talking about a vaccine to prevent the sickness. Well, I was wrong, and Jezebel put me right in my place. And she told me that Dr. Fausti and his ghoul are talking right now about 2 possible treatments given to a patient even after they're already sick. And she reminded me that this ain't no helping elixir or tonic like that Tamiflu crap. She's right. It's an excellent question, because when I checked it, they are working on 2 cures. Just a few weeks after this thing hit, when for the last 100 years they were powerless to do anything for a virus. It don't make any sense. Once again, 4 weeks into what they call this pandemic, and the Center to Create Disease is talking about cures. What the heck? I remember my grandfather telling me entire life, all they told him was what they told me. There ain't no cures for viruses. Pappy was at the doctor last year. He coughed for a month straight. You should have seen him over dinner. It was disgusting. You couldn't even eat your food with the stuff he was pulling up at dinner time. He went to that doctor down the road, that Peckerwood boy, and he asked for some sort of antibiotic, anything that could possibly cure his ailment. And the doctor wouldn't give him none of it. He was saying what was going around this county was called a virus. And if it's viral, there ain't no antibiotics that can do nothing for him or for anybody else, because it leads to something that Pappy called resistant bacteria, whatever the fuck that is. Well, that same doctor, thinking about what's going on right now, he cannot be very happy about this situation with about 400 million gallons of hand sanitizer a month people are using to kill something that's already dead. That's going to eventually create a bacteria that's resistant to anything short of a flamethrower. Next question for Dr. Fausti here is from Gretchen from class. And she asks quite simply, why is the news out to scare the hell out of people? She goes on to write, why do they keep showing Italians in bubble boy masks with tubes down their throat all the time, when those cases, according to her teacher, are far less than 1% of all cases where people normally recover on their own with a little chicken soup? She also writes here that her grandma told her that stress can actually create disease. And in the cases where that disease is not for real, people may start to believe they have the sicknesses that they see on TV and manifest them on themselves. Very interesting, Gretchen. She also says here that she wonders why the news don't spend as much time talking to people who had the virus and who fully recovered from it in a few days. A bunch of people interviewed from their computer cameras saying that they had it and it was no big deal for them. That would go a long way to calming down these panicked assholes. Heck, these people are freaking out more than Judge Smales was freaking out when they found a Baby Ruth candy bar floating in the Bushwood pool. So I agree with you, Gretchen. Where's Tom Hanks and Wilson as beach ball with a public service announcement saying that it wasn't that big of a deal, or there's not as much to worry about as you would think from hearing all this fear porn on the news? Where's Tom Hanks with his public service announcement? He could dress up like Forrest Gump just for fun, and they could make an ad council campaign to be funny as shit. Okay, skipping ahead, Brandon here from class wants Dr. Fausti to tell him, at what point does the solution become worse than the problem itself? Man, these are some smart second graders. Because they're 2 counties over, remember distinctly, 2 counties over yonder back, about the 90s, they were hit with the mad cow disease. Levi Stoltzfus's entire herd had to be put down. They killed all of them. His entire herd put down. It was done to save all the cows in the state, potentially. It made sense that this had to be done. And we all pitched in and donated a cow back to him so we could get back on his feet. And we're neighborly folk here in Arkansas. But what if all the cows in the state needed to be put down to save Stoltzfus's herd? See, that would make no sense. Brandon's father, who submitted the question here, has a small business in Rogers, Arkansas. He says if the government keeps everybody locked up in their homes for just about another month, almost every small business in the country will go belly up. Now, a kid who submitted this question, besides what his father does, he has a personal story why he's very interested in this sort of thing, where the solution is far worse than the problem itself. Just last year when he was in first grade, his senile grandmother took him to the dentist to have all his teeth pulled because she didn't want him to have the same cavities that she had as a kid. Now, good thing the dentist showed some good sense and immediately called his mother to come pick the both of them up. Upon hearing this, Granny acted up, and the dentist had to put her under the laughing gas, which was preferable to locking her in the closet until Sheila arrived. Before she passed out, though, Granny called her grandson the Bumble and looked at the dentist and proclaimed him to be Yukon Cornelius. People around here are starting to ask questions. Wouldn't it be better to let what seems like a simple flu just spread and ensure that hundreds of millions of people are not laid off permanently and be put out into the street and kicked out of their homes and lose permanent employment? Isn't it better to potentially put a few 100,000 at risk than a few billion? See, what's going on now, it just goes a couple more weeks, creates what you call a ripple effect through the economy that would make the Great Depression look like a walk in the park. Again, I'm not going to push this very hard when I meet with Dr. Fausti. I know he's smarter than me, and I know they have plans and they see things that I simply can't see with a simple mind. Okay, what's next? Zed here from class asks, why are all the parks, trails, beaches, and fishing spots, why are they all being closed down now? Because his Nana always told him that for good health, you need to get out into the sun and get out into the fresh air whenever you can, almost an hour a day if you can. So why are they closing all this shit? Most of the parks are closed, and many of them are 100 acres or more, some several thousand acres, and the beaches are millions of acres, yet all closed. There ain't no social distancing problems with 100 people trying to walk around something the size of 50 football fields. They close the parks and the beaches, but they still allow flights where you're just pushed right up against some big fat guy? What's this? Zed has a strange note at the bottom of his submission here. It says, it's almost like they want people to get sick. Well, Zed, he's got some sort of wild imagination, and I'll have to talk to Mrs. Jenkins to talk to him soon. The government makes mistakes, Zed, but they would never consciously do anything that causes harm to you or your family. They must have good reasons why all the parks, beaches, trails, and ponds are closed, and all the flights are still allowed, at least the ones that go to other places other than the Wuhan. You know, there are things taught at Harvard, Zed, and things taught at Cambridge that we in the red states just don't understand. Now, the next question is from Martha from class, and she asked Dr. Fausti, why is it the areas around the world affected by CV flu-like symptoms correlate perfectly or almost perfectly with areas around the world that have rolled out the new cell phone technology? Now, that's all she says here. It's a blank page underneath, but I think she's talking about the new 5D stuff. And, it's a good question because, any monkey could do it. You just take one map that shows the 5D rollout, and you take another map that shows where everybody's coughing and sneezing and running in for ventilators. You put the map on top of each other like two monkeys, and they correlate up. But, I don't know. Dr. Fauci certainly is going to have an answer for that one. It's not like he would ever say that the technology is in any way contributing to a flu. I mean, that's ridiculous. But maybe he'd say something like people are spending too much time inside, FaceTiming in HD and downloading movies in 5 seconds and all the wonderful stuff that technology gives your new cell phone. Maybe he would say people aren't getting the vitamin D by getting into the sun and breathing the fresh air, but I'm getting confused because they closed all the parks, rivers, lakes, streams, and beaches. So it don't seem, once again, excellent question, Martha, because what they're saying ain't consistent with the way they're acting. Butch here asks how China could declare victory over this disease in early March when the rest of the world had 100,000 cases floating around. Butch goes on to ask if the virus is called novel because it's self-aware and knows that once it leaves a country, it is not allowed to come back in that country. Butch, viruses aren't self-aware, although it seems to be acting that way, doesn't it? So maybe it's a pretty good question, because once it left China, why would they declare victory when any Peckerwood boy could cross the border and just bring it right back in? Don't make no sense. Butch is onto something here, even though he thinks viruses are called novel because they're sentient and they know not to come back once they leave. So I don't know, Butch, maybe the virus is under contract. Maybe that's why it's patented. Even with Shen Yun dance troupe returning from dancing around the U.S., wouldn't China be concerned that disease could just come right back again? Why did China post thousands of posters all over the country saying, "We beat it," celebrating their healthcare workers? Butch, to answer your question, though, I think Dr. Fauci would say that the poor devils in China don't have any rights like you do. So the Chinese were able to really put in tough measures that snuffed out the virus before it got out of control. I think that's what they would say. You know, they don't have to worry about people's rights like they do here in the United States. In the U.S., Butch, we have rights. You'd never hear a story here about it being a misdemeanor crime for somebody in San Francisco to leave their home while they're under lockdown. That just wouldn't happen here. That's something that's only going to happen in China. Butch, don't you watch the Super Bowl, boy? Every few years they read that preamble to the Constitution, which reminds all of us what rights we have here that the rest of the world, like China, just does not enjoy. Please reflect on what I'm saying here, Butch, while you're locked in your home and can't fish your local pond. Now, folks, I'll have Mrs. Jenkins talk to Butch about what it means to be a patriotic American. Maybe she can make him write the lyrics to the song "I'm Proud to Be an American" on the school blackboard 5 times. Then he'll know he's free. Well, that is if kids are ever allowed to go back to school. Now, the rest of the pages here from the rest of the class, I'm not going to be able to put it in my presentation to Dr. Fauci, but there was one theme that every child noted, a repeating theme, and I'm going to note it here. Basically, if I put it all together, they say, why is this government and all the governments around the world hell-bent on destroying the entire world economy by assigning so much stock and severity to this CV thing, when the CV thing hasn't even come close to eclipsing the regular seasonal flu in any metric of severity? It's lacking way behind. If the regular flu in some years can kill 600,000 people worldwide, with over 30 million cases sometimes just in the United States, wouldn't any of these horrible pandemic measures and locking people away in their homes, wouldn't it just make sense if the CV version had far eclipsed the regular flu? No, it's still trailing behind. So we scratch our heads. What the hell is going on here? Now, every kid in class made note of this in some form or another, and they all have the little childlike analogies, and I want to point just one out to you here before we close. One kid, one little Peckerwood boy here asks, would they close all the beaches in California if there was a new kind of shark biting people, but they find out the new kind of shark biting people has bitten less people than the other kinds of sharks did all last year? It would only make sense to close the beaches if the new kinds of shark were killing people and biting people a whole lot more than the sharks last year. Well, kid, it's a stupid question. I ain't going to present that to Dr. Fauci or his ghoul. The reason is the beaches are closed, so there ain't going to be no sharks biting people, you dumb son of a beach.